You're listening to The Uncrucified, a fanfiction written and narrated by author Angela R. Sasser. This is an unofficial fan work which takes place within the Exalted 2nd edition setting created by White Wolf and Onyx Path Publishing. Entry 7, Black Sun. The night before my execution was the longest night of my life, and a life filled a third of the way with long, fearful nights. At first, I sat in the dark, my spirit still hollowed out by all that had transpired. Hours passed, and my mind began to race, poring over every detail. Where did we go wrong? What should I have noticed earlier? How could I have stopped this? Could my father have lived if I didn't convince him to fly in the face of the status quo? He could have been working on his maps right now, with none of this worry, while I, like a dutiful daughter, could have been running his business, the both of us prosperous and content as long as we turned a blind eye to the world. It had been my foolish goading all along that led to this. That revelation was when the wall of grief hit me, and the tears I had been holding back since I had first found Aaron dead poured out. I shouted at the top of my lungs, kicking and tearing at the bare accommodations in my cage. I was innocent! Why wouldn't they listen? Surely someone would come and listen. But nobody ever came that night, not even to tell me to be silent. I was left to boil in my own anger and grief, no doubt another mental torture ordered by Aroshu, or perhaps a security measure to ensure nobody learned of the hasty mockery of justice they were planning for me. When they came for me, I was too hoarse and fatigued to protest much as I was stripped and dressed in the white linen frock of the condemned. Please, could I just talk to someone? I remember asking one of the guards in a strained voice. They merely continued on with their duties, completely ignoring my futile pleas. I moved in a surreal dream as they escorted me from the prison to a curtain-black coach. The noon sun blinded me a short time later when we emerged from the carriage at the location they had chosen for my death. I could only stare in disbelief and move involuntarily forward as I was forced to walk down the path flanked by guards. The screaming faces of a crowd gathered for the execution pressed in on me on all sides. Some of them were familiar, people I talked to every day. Some shouted in excitement or anger, while others looked on in shocked fascination. Could she really have done it? I'm sure they wondered. The fetid rain of rotten vegetables and garbage was a telling sign of their belief. The slow, seemingly endless march ended at a makeshift platform prepared especially for me. Gazing over the scene and taking in the familiar crates and podiums, I finally realized where I was. It was the square of the slave market. At that moment, the square was eerily empty of traders and flesh to sell. No one ever called it a slave market, despite that being what it was. Permanent employees were merely drafted and processed here. Unfortunate individuals would be forced into contracts and brought here where their lives were auctioned away. I remembered passing through here all those years ago, a teenager fresh from the wounds of betrayal. That day, I saw the bodies of crucified criminals displayed proudly next to the docks, their twisted corpses still nailed to stained wooden crosses, while their broken, misshapen legs dangled below them. An example for all to see, a hidden message to all slaves who ever thought of rebellion. I would join that gruesome puppet show as a powerful warning. This would be my fate. The realization made me shudder. They must have paid a fortune to clear the square for the event. Thinking back on it, I could almost admire their creative choice of execution grounds for me. And there Aroshu stood, officiating the whole hard scene from atop a podium on the makeshift dais, and drinking in my shock with a barely masked smile of satisfaction. Now we bring this murderer of the much-loved Aaron Vadras, the fearless seeker, to justice! At the sound of his voice, the crowd roared, and the full horror began to unfold. The guards grasped me by each arm and yanked me forward towards the terrible construction of wood beams that had been prepared for me. All the while, I pleaded and begged for help from the crowd, my voice a frightened whimper. I found nothing but the same familiar yet alien faces. They hauled my body unceremoniously onto the wood, catching my errant hands and feet and holding them into place while the black-masked executioner secured them with rough ropes. They splayed my limbs like a dead bird's wings across the wood. I could barely breathe, the panic setting in when I noticed the long spike in the executioner's hand as he knelt by my side. He centered the sharp point of it over the juncture of my left palm. "Kalara Vadras, do you confess to this heinous murder so that your soul may be cleansed for your next life? A merciful death awaits for those who repent." Aroshu's sneering visage caught my panicked gaze. A hush settled over the crowd as all awaited my answer. I could feel the hatred from them, from Aroshu. I knew they wanted the satisfaction of my confession, and I knew it meant a quicker death than what the cross offered. "No." I shook my head for emphasis, my chest heaving with anger. "No," I said again, louder and more clearly. I chose the long death. The first drive of the sledgehammer was enough to pierce the stake through my left hand, but not enough to mount it securely to the beam beneath me. It took a second and a third impact to make sure of that. The intense impact of metal against metal drowned out the screams that tore from me without my consent. I had meant to be strong, to give them not an inch, but nothing could have prepared me for that sudden sharpness and the finality of my impending death. "I implore you once more, confess!" Aroshu shouted again, so self-assured in his plea for the mercy of my soul, but confounded at my stubborn resistance that thwarted the satisfaction of any confession. I only glared at him through the unwanted tears dragged out of me by the pain. The executioner leveled the next stake over my right hand. The sharp point lingered, poised for its inevitable target, awaiting the signal to fall. I shook my head again. No. I had no more tears left. No. I would spend my last awful hours on earth satisfied in my final tiny rebellion. I think I smiled then as the executioner drew his arm back to make the fateful strike. But the strike never came. Caught between one breath and the next, the world grew still and quiet. I laid my head back against the rough wood, caught in utter defeat. My gaze turned towards the sky, where the noon sun blinded me with its white-hot glare. Past the executioner's masked face, past Aroshu's smirk, I looked into the blinding sun overhead and closed my eyes, ready to die. And then in the next moment, I was standing in a vast expanse, the sliver of a sun peeking over the rise. The sunlight suddenly cut like a white blade across the horizon, as if 1,000 sunrises happened at once. Strangely, it didn't hurt my eyes as I had expected it to. At the center of the sunrise, a mirror flashed, catching my eyes with brilliance. I spotted the silhouette of a man holding the mirror moving closer, the corona of the sun behind him. Or was it coming from him? He came closer, and I saw the expanse of 4 arms cloaked in golden radiance. In each hand he held a spear, a shield, a branch, and a horn. I know they will say I am a liar, but even this ignorant slave knew his form from stories. I knew him from old abandoned statues, all torn down and grown with ivy. He was called the Unconquered Sun once. As I live and breathe, I saw him that day on the cross. He reached out his hand to me, and I instinctively reached for him. A flurry of images raced through my mind, and I felt his voice in my bones, my very being. "You have been chosen." I saw a grand army, generals flagged by glorious standards, leaders facing one another, each with arms outstretched and clasped in a handshake of peace. I knew my destiny then. Radiance washed through me, cleansing all doubt and fear. Everything I ever was had led up to this moment of absolution. When I opened my eyes again, yet another arm emerged from his chest within the mirror. This arm held nothing, but I knew in my heart the invisible majesty of its purpose. I had no fear as I touched my fingers to the strange 5th hand. Golden essence glowed where our fingertips touched, and a new purpose filled me, wrapped around me, poured into my heart. The mirror encircled me, its edges brimming with molten dark and light essence that stung the edges of my vision. Sunlight blinded me once more, and I found myself back in the world, the side of a black sun trimmed by the pink corona of an eclipse filling my vision. The entire sky turned to night, and pure silence fell over the entire square. Even the wind seemed to stop. I looked over at my left hand that had been so cruelly nailed to the cross. The stake pierced through it turned white-hot and melted away in tiny rivers of molten metal. Nothing but a scar where the metal had been embedded remained after. Much to my astonishment, I felt no pain as the metal trickled away like water. I should have been surprised when the executioner began to untie the ropes, but I wasn't. I stared at him, somehow content with his actions. He even helped me to my feet. I rose and surveyed the crowd with a calm, sweeping gaze, cradling my palm which had miraculously healed with only the vestigial blood from the closed wound dripping down my fingers. The shadow of the eclipse fell over us all, bringing with it a preternatural tranquility to the Slaver's Square. Even Oroshu, in all his burning contempt, could only stand where he was, staring with his mouth agape. Even still, none moved against me. I don't think they could, even if they had tried. They knew this was right, that I should live. Heaven would have it so. The crowd parted before me as I made my way off the execution stand and stumbled through the dusty square in complete silence. I managed to stagger all the way home without a single soul stopping me. I must have been a peculiar sight as I shambled home through the city in my blood-stained frock and bare feet. Once I was home, I packed clothing and supplies. From above the mantel, I retrieved my father's prized pistols. Somehow it felt wrong to leave them behind. When I touched them, I felt something new pulse through me. They felt alive somehow. I knew then they weren't my father's, and never had been. They were mine, and mine alone. Next, I took a knife and cut the red southern tresses from my head and tossed them into the fireplace. I swore to myself, as I watched the hair burn away into embers, that I would not let my father's death be in vain. I was someone entirely new now. Father did always like the name Ko. It was his favorite character from a story about a gunslinging bandit king. Ko would be the perfect persona for this new life. He would be a mask I could wear to trick my enemies until the time was right. In this new life, this new passion that flowed in me, I found patience in my purpose and revenge. The final item I took was my father's reading glasses. One last memento to keep him close to my heart. They would become a key part of the new identity I had fashioned for myself as Ko. Even in disguise, I could proclaim my relationship to him, to myself, as long as I wore them. My only regret in leaving then was that I could not send my father off to his next life. I only hoped someone else had stepped up to perform such rites for him. I swore to my father, wherever he was, that I would return one day and reclaim what was ours. I would make sure all that he had built was not squandered. I would see his betrayers punished. That day I said goodbye to all that I knew and set forth on a journey whose destination I did not know. I would realize our dreams of a new world, a new guild, pristine in all things. For the second time in my life, I learned to dream again, and I was not afraid.